I'm your host, Bobby Lee Hartman. I'm a new technical program manager here at Coinbase, working on the developer community programming for the Coinbase Developer Platform. I'm joined today by Ben Rodriguez, a senior protocol specialist here at Coinbase. Ben leverages his background in product, engineering, and education to advance our staking products and support Coinbase's mission to be the go-to platform for all things crypto and bringing the world on chain. And our next speaker is Justin Drake. Super excited to have Justin here. He's a prominent researcher at the Ethereum Foundation who designs crypto economic mechanisms for the Ethereum consensus. So today our topics the speakers will go over are, what are commitments? How do they work? What use cases can commitments unlock? How big is the opportunity? How big of an opportunity is this? Do we think it's going to be a big unlock with MEV and MEV boost? Commit boost, and we'll also go over base rollups and base sequencing. So before we get started, I'd like to first mention a few housekeeping rules. We will have Q&A sessions towards the end of the presentation, but throughout the conversation, if you have questions, just post those in the chat on the right-hand side, and we'll be monitoring those questions and do our best to keep them answered. We just ask that you please keep your questions relevant to the topic and to be respectful to everyone and the speakers. The session is also going to be recorded, so you can come back to it later, and we'll have it for viewing on the Coinbase YouTube channel, which we'll link later in Discord, and we'll make sure to notify everybody when that's been uploaded. So, okay, to kick everything off, we love for everyone to add to the chat now. How familiar are you with, on a scale of 1 to 10, with commitments already? So I'll pause now for you all to answer that in the chat, and while the speakers kind of get ready to take things over. Cool, so some familiar, some new. So yeah, so you probably understand, if you are familiar with this, you understand the need to, this is similar to the situation with the Solana network. And then if you're new to this, commitments are a new primitive that they're not that's not actually new. So there's been a lot of research in this for years that is only being picked up in interest now. So let me just hand this over to Justin, and we can start explaining what commitments are. And yeah, if you guys can take it from here.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, I do want to kind of clarify a little bit that I think in this context, we're talking about proposer commitments specifically. We have all sorts of commitments in the blockchain space. We have cryptographic commitments. We have smart contracts, which in some way are credible commitments about the way that programs run. We have attester commitments, but here we're talking about proposers. And a proposer in the context of Ethereum consensus is the entity who is going to be producing the next Ethereum block.
Yeah, sweet. Thanks for clarifying that, Justin. I know there's one of the things also that we know of in just like the crypto space in general is the nomenclature of things, right? There's a lot of like loaded terms or just like terms that like can be like, as you said, there's many different types of like commitments, and today we'll be talking about proposer commitments. So then why don't we actually get right into it? Give us what are like the proposer commitments. Give us like a one-liner definition of it, and then like get right into the word that we hear around these proposer commitments, pre-confirmations. Can we get in? Let's start with that.
Yeah, so a proposer commitment is a commitment that the next proposer or one of the proposers in the future makes to some sort of counterparty, which could be a user or even a roll-up that wants to consume some of the block space that the proposer is proposing. And these commitments are backed by crypto economics, meaning that they take the form of a signature from the proposer, and they are backed by collateral. And if the commitment is not honored, then the idea is to slash or to penalize the proposer. And you can also have a mechanism of insurance whereby, as a user, if my pre-confirmation is not honored, then I get compensation for not having my pre-confirmation, my commitment be honored. And you mentioned pre-confirmations as one of the big examples of pre-confirmation of commitments, that proposers can do, where basically they promise to include a user's transaction at a specific position in a block. For example, if you're making a Uniswap transaction, you can know with very low latency just by communicating with the proposer and getting such a pre-confirmation what your Uniswap price is without the next block having been produced. So typically on Ethereum, you have to wait between 0 and 12 seconds. That's the time it takes for the new block to be produced. And you can speed that up to essentially one ping time. So the time it takes for you to communicate to the proposer and back.
Sweet. Yeah, no. So, it's actually very interesting because this kind of all like one of the reasons it kind of all started is that there was a ETH research forum post. It was called I believe Base Rollups Superpowers from L1 Sequencing. And it gets into the idea of pre-confirmations being related to this. So why don't we actually get into what base rollups are and like how pre-confirmations are related to base rollups?
Right. So base rollups are rollups where the sequencer, the entity that is choosing the ordering of the transactions, is the L1 itself. It's the L1 validators or the L1 proposers. And by choosing to opt in to the based sequencer, you have multiple advantages. One of them is that it's just available today out of the box. So that's pretty convenient. But it's also extremely secure and credibly neutral. So it doesn't introduce a new security assumption, a new token, a new brand. And I think the key thing about base rollups is this credibly neutral aspect, whereby many different rollups may choose to opt in to the sequencer as a shared sequencer. So a shared sequencer is simply a sequencer that multiple rollups have chosen to opt in simultaneously. And the nice property about shared sequences is that at any given slot, one entity is proposing blocks for all the rollups. And that unlocks a superpowered form of composability known as synchronous composability. So it's this notion that a contract in one of the rollups that share a sequencer can call any other contract in another rollup that also shares a sequencer, just like they would call contracts on Ethereum L1. For example, Aave can call Uniswap and get an immediate response. And this is how applications are designed today in this synchronous model.
So let's get deeper into that because so you said there's some like advantages with the composability, synchronous composability and stuff like that. Like obviously one of the like kind of like I don't know problems so to speak of the current rollup design is fragmentation, right? Like we don't necessarily like the optimism rollup like doesn't necessarily know what's going on in the Arbitrum rollup, for example, or base, for example, right? So would you say that like base rollups that would be kind of like a solution to this fragmentation problem?
Exactly. So if we look at the big picture, we have a problem, the fragmentation problem, which we want to solve. How do we solve that? Well, one, in my opinion, critical piece of infrastructure that we need is this shared sequencer. In order to achieve shared sequencing, we need a credibly neutral shared sequencer that every rollup and their competitor can feel comfortable opting in. If Arbitrum builds a sequencer, is Base going to feel comfortable opting into that? And vice versa. If Base comes up with its own sequencer, will Arbitrum feel comfortable opting in? So what I think will happen is that we're going to see ecosystem-wide shared sequencers, maybe an Optimism superchain shared sequencer, or an Arbitrum shared sequencer, or a Polygon ecosystem shared sequencer. But I'm trying to think, long-term, one step ahead, and I'd like to see an Ethereum-wide shared sequencer. And I think we all stand to win because this is what's going to maximize the network effects of Ethereum as a whole. But it's also going to maximize the fee revenue for these rollups because the more composability that you have, the more opportunity for transactions, which means more traffic, more congestion and therefore more congestion fees for the rollups that are sharing this sequencer. And now to go back to your previous question, what is the relationship between base sequencing and pre-confirmations? Base sequencing is great and all from a credibly neutral standpoint, but it has like one big disadvantage relative to a lot of the rollup sequencers in production today, which is that the slot time is much, much longer. So in the Optimism superchain ecosystem, I believe that the slot time is 2 seconds. On Arbitrum, I believe it's closer to 250 milliseconds. And that is much, much faster than the 12 seconds on layer 1. And so really what base sequencing is trying to do with the pre-confirmations is to patch this UX gap. And not only could we potentially like fix the base sequencing UX problems, but that can also be reused at layer 1. So it's possible that the layer 1 EVM itself could have much better UX in the foreseeable future.
All right, muted myself by accident. So that's interesting because like so now it sounds like with like base sequencing that we solve a lot of issues. I want to know a little bit about like the disadvantages of base sequencing because like it seems like everything's like every time someone says something about oh yeah it's good for this, it's good for that, it's good for that, right? So it's like synchronous composability, fix the fragmentation problem, like there's going to be collectively more like fee generation and all that fun stuff, right? But what like are some of the disadvantages of like like base sequencing? Just because like try to like paint the picture of like we have we know what the disadvantages are of just the sequencing kind of like or the rollups like as currently designed. So what are some of the disadvantages of like what is with the base sequencing?
Right, so there's lots of possible disadvantages that one could come up with for base sequencing. One of them that I already mentioned is that the slot times are much longer. And we can try and fix that with pre-confirmations, but then there's another disadvantage of pre-confirmations itself, which is that it introduces complexity. It hasn't been really developed, and so it's work in progress. Another disadvantage of base sequencing is that one could come up with is that it overloads the L1. Right? So as a proposer, like my role today is to build an Ethereum block. But really, with the notion of base sequencing, you would also be building blocks for all the other rollups. Now, I don't think this is a problem because we have this notion called PBS, proposer builder separation. So today, it turns out that the proposers don't build even Ethereum L1 blocks because this is a very difficult thing to do in a competitive way. Instead, they outsource it to builders. And what will happen is that those builders would be building the rollup blocks on behalf of the proposers. And actually, if you zoom in within the world of builders, oftentimes it's not the builder itself that's doing the work, but it's the searchers that are working on behalf of the builder that is doing all the heavy lifting. And so what I expect will happen is that we're going to have base rollup searchers that specialize in individual base rollups, and then they will be providing these L2 blocks to the L1 builders that will ultimately include those L2 blocks in an L1 block that the proposer will get on chain.
Let's go deeper into that. Thanks for that, Justin. But let's go deeper into that because, as you said, like we have PBS, right, and we have like the builders building like they're specialized in building blocks, and maybe the search in this case with searchers trying to find like the sequence blocks and all that fun stuff. But like right now, wouldn't that be kind of like another like a further kind of like enshrined centralization aspect because of the fact that we do have like kind of like what is it, four builders building like 85% of the blocks right now? Wouldn't that like kind of like further enshrine because like this is also a specialized role, right, to build this, right? So wouldn't that like further like that potential centralization problem?
Yes. So actually, the centralization today is quite a bit worse. I just checked this morning. 95% of MEV blocks are built by two builders.
Oh,
So
okay.
we're very, very quickly centralizing. I mean, I must note that about 10% of blocks are not built through MEV Boost. They're actually self-built, and that is quite a healthy number. Now, so can you remind me your question around decentralization? Yes, does it make it worse? Okay, yeah. So one of the things you asked was, does it enshrine it? So usually we use the word enshrine to mean that there's some sort of L1 change in order to put this into effect. So it turns out that base sequencing and pre-confirmations are purely outside of the consensus layer. They're at the application layer, if you will. And it's permissionless innovation. And the genie's out of the bottle, and there's no way that you can kind of put it back in. And so this is a problem that we do need to solve. But the other thing I'll say is that, yes, like building is extremely sophisticated. In order to be a competitive builder, you need many different things. You need very good connection with searchers. You need low latency infrastructure around the world. You need very good connection to decentralized exchanges. And oftentimes, you need to be a high volume actor so that you can have very low trading fees because exchanges have this fee-based, volume-based fee model. And you also need, a team of PhDs, is how some people describe them. Basically, you need a lot of very smart people that can build all the algorithms to build these optimal blocks. And yes, like we're putting more of this work to the builders, but actually, if we are in a decentralized sequencer model where all these rollups or some subset of these rollups will decentralized, they will have builders anyway. And so the question is it better to have builders that are asynchronous and don't necessarily talk to each other, or is it better to just have a model which is purely synchronous, where you have a mega builder that's kind of responsible for everything in any given slot? And one of the possible answers to this is that in both cases, it will be the same outcome. And the reason is that even if you have this asynchronous model where you have multiple builders, they will have an incentive to collude with each other, to work together. And the reason is that will lead to better economic outcomes. And so I think that the natural way to get to the end game is just to design for the synchronous world in the first place, because otherwise what you risk doing is having to build all sorts of complicated L2 infrastructure to patch the fact that you don't have the synchrony, and that will ultimately lead to net more complexity and more brittleness, and potentially more centralization, because you need to be able to navigate that complexity as a builder, than if you were to just lower the barrier to entry as much as possible, just have everyone on a fair playing ground, and then embrace this notion of synchrony.
Maybe just a pie in the sky question here. With like building being like very sophisticated and whatnot, do you think that there's just kind of like a discussion question here? Do we think that we're ever going to get to a point where we could potentially decentralize the builder aspect of PBS in a way that like maybe there's like like you said, you kind of like lower the barrier to entry, but kind of like lower the barrier to actually building blocks, because it is so sophisticated. What do you think that we'd ever get to a point like that? Just kind of just a discussion question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess there's three potential answers. The first one is that even if we don't succeed in decentralizing the building, it's not the end of the world. And the reason is that we're designing the consensus layer so that even if there's only one builder and it's the devil, they still can't do bad things. And the reason is that they can't do censorship because we have inclusion lists. They can't cause liveness failure on the chain. They can't cause safety failures. They can't do any of the bad stuff. Like the main thing that they can do is monopolize the extraction of MEV. Now, answer number two, especially if you had asked me 6 months ago, would have been Suave from Flashbots, right? So they're building all this infrastructure using TEEs to try and decentralize the builder. But I have an even better kind of answer today, which is Suave plus pre-confirmations. And the reason is that when you're in a pre-confirmation model, and actually the slide that's being shown right now kind of illustrates this, you have a direct connection from the user to the sequencer. So the emoji 1, 2, 3, 4 here is the sequencer, because they're responsible for ordering the transactions. And you see this, in some sense, there's no builder. Like the title here is real-time building. And the way that it works is that transactions are processed first come, first serve. And so you see here on the right-hand side, we have a block being built, and the blue portion here, they're called shreds. So each shred here is a transaction, if you will. They come in and they build the top of the block first come, first serve. And then now you have a user transaction coming in, they send a pre-confirmation request, and then that gets added to the top of the block. And when you work in this model, you actually don't have any builders. You remove them from the equation. And instead, you're working directly with the searchers. So I didn't show it in this slide here, but basically, there's one issue here with this picture, which is how do you price pre-confirmations? So when you send make a pre-confirmation request, there's a tip, which is called the pre-confirmation tip, which basically pays for the benefit of having your transaction pre-confirmed. And this interacts very heavily with MEV, right? Because if I'm doing a Uniswap trade and it, for example, reduces the arbitrage opportunity for the proposer, well, the proposer needs to be compensated for the lost opportunity of putting your trade instead of putting their trade that extracts the arbitrage. And so now you need the so-called prices, which are basically fancy searchers, that are going to come up with a fair value for the pre-confirmation tip. And the way that this would work is with Suave. So Suave would be kind of running a network of searchers. And the nice thing about Suave is that it's basically an encrypted mempool or OFA, like an auction for order flow. So the searchers, they see the flow of transactions. Like fundamentally, they need to have some information about the transactions that they're trying to pre-confirm, but we don't want them to do any front running. And so everything needs to be encrypted. And this is where the magic of TEs come in, where they can run their searcher algorithms within the TEs without seeing in clear text the transactions that come from users.
Awesome. No, that's really great, because like it's one of those things that, the people think like there's like this kind of like dark cloud kind of like on this, where it's like, oh, we have just like you just checked it this morning, apparently 95% two builders, like, that tends to scare some people. So like it's good to see the, like, that your answers to that, where it's like, hey, like, it's not the end of the world, and in case we have this like one super builder, that's the devil. So awesome. So let's get into, actually, let's go continue talking about, like, the kind of flow of things here, right? So like with pre-confirmations in general, we've been talking about, like, an application of it, like, with based rollups, based sequencing and whatnot. How does one, like, for example, like, you said you talked about a pre-confirmation, like, fee of some sort, right? So how does like one, like, opt in to being able to be like a pre-confirmation actor in the ecosystem, right? Like, because like, this we, like you said, it's like kind of like it's not part of protocol, right? It's out of protocol, right? So is it something like, Mev Boost, where you have to like run a sidecar or something like that?
Yes, that's exactly right. So if you are a validator today, a staker, then you basically need to run a sidecar. And it's slightly different to MevBoost in the sense that you also need to be collateralized, right? Because we're talking about these crypto economic commitments. And so the suggestion that's being put forward today, but this number is up to debate, is that for pre-confirmation specifically, 1 ETH is a good number. And this is actually 1 ETH per operator, is not 1 ETH per validator. So if you run multiple validators, you can reuse the collateral across your validators. So basically, there's 3 things that you need to do. One is download this piece of software, which is going to be a sidecar. And then you need to have some collateral. And 3, you need to delegate your sequencing rights to a so-called gateway. So today, the building is kind of delegated to builders and to relays, and the equivalent of relays in the context of MevBoost is called a gateway. It's just a new term that we came up with. And what the gateway does is that it's the sequencer here. It's the 1, 2, 3, 4. They are going to be receiving all the flow from the users, and they're going to be doing the ordering on behalf of the proposer. And the reason why it is important to have this delegation model is because we want the proposers to be running on Raspberry Pis, right? That's the meme, or on very low powered machines. And all the heavy lifting to be done by these much more sophisticated gateways that are effectively just like relays. It's the new relay. And why do sequencers have to be sophisticated? Well, they need to be able to, ingest thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of transactions per second from users. They need to have very high uptime, very low latency, and they also need to run all the infrastructure to do the pricing. So they need to be running an auction with all the prices, and they also need to be running this Suave infrastructure with TEs. And so it is a fairly sophisticated job. But the good news is that if you're a validator, you don't have to do that.
Sweet, awesome. That makes sense to me. So then, like, let's get into, because there's maybe a follow-up question to that, but I want to get into this specific question first because it'll lead into this next question. So is there other like we've been talking about like base sequencing this entire time, right? Are there other use cases for pre-confirmations? Because it's sounding like, this is almost like a gas market for it in a way, right? So like, and you're talking about like kind of like almost like a promise in the future for with pre-confirmations, right? So it almost sounds like block space futures in a way as well, right? So like, are there any other like use cases that maybe that we can discuss through of pre-confirmations?
Yes. So one of the things I want to highlight is that pre-confirmations work very generally for proof of stake consensus. So the only thing you need is to have visibility over who the next proposer is. And almost all proof of stake consensus have this property. And so, for example, Base, which operates a 2-second block time, if it wants to reduce its effective user experience latency to 100 milliseconds, which is 20 times faster, it could opt into pre-confirmations as well. This is not limited to base sequencing. Now, as you said, effectively, a pre-confirmation is a block space future. It's a short-dated block space future, which is short-lived on the matter of seconds. But what if we had long-dated futures? What if Coinbase, for example, were to sell months ahead their block space that they're expected to produce in the future to entities that consume very large amounts of block space, for example, rollups? And this is a great use case for rollups. And the reason is that rollups want to give predictability to their users, but they have to pay unpredictable layer one base fees. They don't know how much they have to pay. And so what they can do is basically hedge their fee risk by buying bulk amounts of block space ahead of time. And this is something that businesses do in a routine business, in a routine way. So for example, airline companies that consume a lot of fuel, they buy their fuel months and months in advance. And the reason is that they also sell plane tickets months and months in advance. And so if they sell a plane ticket for $100 and the price of oil just went up 2x, then they could go bankrupt. And you could do this these long-dated futures with pre-confirmations. And actually, there's a framework for proposer commitment sidecars, which is called Commit Boost, which is being built out so that instead of having to download a sidecar for pre-confirmations and a sidecar for these long-dated block space futures, you just download one sidecar. And it would be called Commit Boost. And on top of this sidecar, you would install various modules. So this is merely like a convenience and standardization effort that is being brought forward, but it should also lower the barrier to entry for people who want to build these sidecars. Because now everyone will have, like most of the validators will have this sidecar running, and now the friction to installing a new module is relatively low. And one module that the Lighthouse team has started building is an inclusion list module. And the idea here is that as a proposer, I might want to only connect to relays or only receive blocks from builders that contain transactions that I really care about. Like, you must include those transactions. Otherwise, just don't even bother sending me a block. And the use case here is censorship resistance. So if you, as a validator, observe that there's a transaction in the mempool that's been sitting in the mempool for several blocks and it hasn't been picked up, it's like, this is very strange. Like, it should have been included by now. What I'm going to do is take that transaction, put it in the inclusion list, and force basically the builders and the relays to build blocks that have this transaction. And if this commitment is not honored, then the builders, for example, could get slashed. So here it's like a slightly inverted situation where the collateral doesn't come from the proposer, but actually the collateral comes from the builders and the relays.
Awesome. Yeah, you preempted the question that I was going to have, because if there's going to be multiple types of commitment slash pre-confirmation protocols, right, that people are building as sidecars, right, like similar to like what we do with like running Mev Boost. And I was like, validator operators running 10, 20 different sidecars, that increases the surface area of things that can go wrong. Right. But with the standardization of like what you were just mentioned about commit boost, where it's like you can kind of like opt in a way where it's like, here's this one sidecar, you can opt into specific commitment protocols. That would be definitely a much better risk profile for validator operators. Now, the one thing I do want to point out, where you're talking about inclusion lists. One thing, and we don't need to go too far into the conversation, I think that's great. The thing is, that is still for example, let's say we have commit boost, and one of the options is to run this kind of inclusion list, inclusion pre-confirmation protocol that I guess Lighthouse is building and whatnot. Was it Lighthouse you said? Yeah, right? You said Lighthouse?
Yes.
Yeah. That's still kind of an active choice, right? Where, they have to choose to run that protocol. And, I'm not trying to be a lawyer and talk for every validator operator, but that active choice, is something that, probably a lot of operators might not want to make, right? When it comes to anything regarding censorship resistance, in terms of having to make that active choice. They would like to probably have plausible deniability, where it's yeah, well, it's just included, I can't change and I can't really do anything about it. So it's just something to think about. We don't need to go that deep into it, but if you have a comment on that, happy to hear it.
Yeah, I have two comments. Comment number one is that we're working on something called attester proposer separation, where basically the validators are no longer responsible for doing the proposing. Instead, that's opened up to the market. And so, as a validator operator, the only thing I'm really doing is attesting, and that's very easy. And there's no decision to be done. I voted the block arrived on time or it didn't arrive on time. It's basically one bit of entropy in your vote. The other thing I'll mention is that we're working on this very nice design called Fossil, which is basically an inclusion list. The IL in Fossil stands for inclusion list, where there's multiple proposers that contribute to this inclusion list. So instead of one entity, the validator operator being responsible for it, it's actually a collective. And that has multiple advantages. One is that you have the plausible deniability of the collective, which is nice, but you also have this honest minority where you just need one entity in the collective to put in the censored transactions in order for the inclusion list to be correctly populated. And maybe some large fraction, let's say 80% of the operators don't want to even populate this inclusion list in this group dynamic. But even if 10% or 20% or 5%, some small number of operators do want to do that, then we would still get the censorship resistance. And this is part of the reason why decentralization is so important. And this long tail of solo validators do contribute a lot, because it suffices to have 5% of solo validators to populate these inclusion lists for the broader ecosystem.
Sweet deal. Awesome. Love to hear that. We were supposed to talk about pre-confirmations and whatnot. We're talking about censorship resistance right now. You're getting a whole full episode, y'all. This is great. So, what's it called? So I guess last thing to like, and then we could like open it up for some questions, right? Like, you know, what excites you for like the future of like commitments, pre-confirmations? We kind of like touched upon it, like the like over like the past like 25 minutes we've been speaking, right? Do you suspect that like we're going to just have like a full market of like commitment protocols and stuff like that, and like maybe like what are some of the protocols that are being built right now? We also discussed a little bit about that, but let's try to summarize that all.
Yeah, so I'm aware of 3 types of protocols that are being built: pre-confirmations, long-dated block space futures, and inclusion lists. And in some sense, now it's permissionless innovation to do other things. But the thing I'm particularly interested about is the pre-confirmations. And I think that will have a lot of wholesome effects for the whole ecosystem. Number one, I think we have an opportunity to dramatically improve Ethereum user experience across the board for the L1 in particular, for base rollups in particular, but also for the broader rollups. And in some sense, the pre-confirmation research was motivated by Solana. Right? Solana has a different approach to low latency user experience, which is to have these short slot times. It has 400 millisecond slot times. And this is maybe a whole different discussion, but actually the Solana model is very similar technically to pre-confirmations. And the reason is that you have one proposer that is proposing 4 slots in a row. So technically speaking, the proposer window is 1.6 seconds. And you can think of these intra slots as being kind of like pre-confirmations. The second thing that I'm very interested about, and I already mentioned, is this wholesome idea of fixing Ethereum fragmentation. If we can have a credibly neutral shared sequencer, which is compelling kind of commercially and is pragmatic in the sense that it provides best-in-class UX, then there is hope to have Ethereum-wide healing as opposed to ecosystem by ecosystem healing. And then another thing that I'm kind of excited about pre-confirmations, and this is a little bit surprising and cool, is that we can fix the mempool problem that we have on Ethereum today. So the public mempool is dying. So we used to have a canonical place where transactions would be sent to. It was called the public mempool. And it was very nice because it provided a lot of transparency, and it was very, very clear what you had to do as a user and as a proposer and as a block builder. But now, instead, what we have is this fragmentation of mempool. So for example, MetaMask and the other big wallets like the Rabbi wallet have their own custom encrypted mempool or encrypted OFA that they run. It's a proprietary mempool. And the reason why they do this is for 2 reasons. Reason number one is that it prevents user front running. It prevents sandwiching of their users. It's a way to protect their users from MEV extraction. But reason number 2, and maybe ultimately the biggest reason for them, is that they can make money out of it. And the reason is that they can extract the back running. So if I make a trade on Uniswap and it moves the price, then now the wallet can come immediately after and basically capture the arbitrage opportunity. And they're making large amounts of money from these private OFAs. And so the public mempool is dying. Every single week, the percentage of transactions that go on chain do not touch the public mempool. And with pre-confirmations, the only thing that you can do as a wallet is send your flow directly to the next proposer or the next gateway. You can't play these games anymore where the mempool is fragmented. There's one shutting point similar to the public mempool where everything has to go to be aggregated. So you're fixing this fragmentation problem, but also there's an opportunity to build much more valuable blocks. And that's for 2 reasons. Reason number one is that because we have a unified auction, there's better pricing information. There's just, you have more pricing participants that are coming in, and that leads to a more efficient auction and more valuable blocks. Because what's happening today is that you have these two builders, builder A and builder B. They're running parallel auctions, and there's some alpha, right, which is only leaked to builder A, and some alpha which is only leaked to builder B. And really, what we want is the combined alpha of all the builders to build the best blocks. And not only is it a matter, do pre-confirmations increase the value of blocks by unifying the alpha, but it's also providing more value for the user. So the pre-confirmation tips, which basically reflect the UX premium for users, is going to be a net increase in the value of the blocks for the proposers. And so this is kind of the bull case for a relatively rapid adoption of these pre-confirmations. So when the merge happened, MEV-Boost adoption from day one was extremely low. It was like in the maybe 10% or even single-digit percentage adoption. And then it very, very quickly over a span of a year and a half, I need to look exactly, we reached 90% adoption. And the reason is that it was the rational move to adopt MEV-Boost. And if we have these more efficient auctions and we have this additional alpha, UX premiums and pre-confirmation tips, we could also potentially see a rapid adoption.
Awesome, Justin. Thank you so much. This has been great. I mean, this conversation, I mean, we learned a lot here. I imagine a lot of people in the audience learned a lot here as well. Bobby Lee, do you want to take us out?
Yeah. Do we have any questions in the chat? Just checking that over. Pre-conf is blob. Is that a proper question for you guys to answer?
Go for it, Justin.
I don't know if it means something specific. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so let me try and answer this. So a pre-confirmation is a bilateral agreement between the user and the proposer or the gateway. So it's an off-chain message that is signed. And you're right that ultimately what is being signed is a promise that a specific transaction will get included on chain, and ultimately that transaction will go in a blob, be compressed as part of a rollup in a blob. But the pre-confirmation comes way before the inclusion on chain. The blob part is inclusion. The pre-confirmation happens a few seconds ahead of that.
Got it. Okay, I think one question I wanted to ask was, where can people find more information on ETH commitments to keep learning about what you guys have all discussed?
Yes. So if you want to go like really deep, there is a bi-weekly call roughly. It's called the sequencing and pre-confirmation call. We've had 14 of them so far, and the next one is on Friday. If you want to participate, DM me. All the past calls have been recorded. They're available online. We also have notes. And we generally have 50 to 60 people attending every call, and they tend to be very, very technical. If you're less technical and you just want to get engaged in a more casual way, the best venue is sequencing day. So we've had several sequencing days so far, and the next one is going to be at DEF CON in Thailand on November 15th. The link to sign up is luma, so lu.ma/sequencing_day. And that is a great way to learn. If you have questions about base sequencing or pre-confirmations, my DMs are open. You can reach me on Twitter, for example, or you could find me on Telegram. I'm Justin Drake, all lowercase, all one word on Telegram.
Awesome. Thank you so much, you guys. So that brings us to the end of our discussion. Thanks, Ben and Justin. It's a pleasure having you guys. And to the audience, if you have any additional questions or would like to keep the discussion going, feel free to reach out to us again, on Discord, and Ben and Justin on Twitter. We'll add those handles to the chats. And then, yeah, thanks again, everybody, for today. We look forward to seeing you at our next event, which will be on September 12th, so in 2 days. And that'll be about Coinbase Commerce, and that'll be more of an AMA style discussion. So yeah, have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, y'all. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Bob.